What's going on, guys? Drubadewski here. Today we're going to do a build review of what I started Harvest with, and this is Detonate, Dead, Ignite, and it's self-casted, right? A lot of people are playing VD Spellslinger right now, and for this specific build, I did start that way and leveled with VD Spellslinger until about yellow maps or so, but then I switched over to this. Some of the benefits of running this is the clear is really fast. The screen's a lot easier to see what's going on. I mean, you can see in the background, we're just popping Detonate, Dead and shredding these bosses, right? We just utterly destroy everything. We've been doing 16s. I have done serious with this a bunch, or I've done it 2 times so far, and it's been fairly straightforward. Now, this is an Ignite-based build. Some other major benefits, especially in this league right now with so many people playing Volatile Dead, is that you're scaling damage differently, right? So a lot of the equipment upgrades are a lot cheaper than if you were to stay with VD for the entire time. I really enjoyed this playstyle. You know, Nick Tater from Community showed me this setup before the league started, saying this was probably going to be his starter. And after I set it up and played it, I knew I had to do it. I really enjoyed the build. I think it's super fun. So what we're going to go over today is I'm going to talk about when we transition from VD into Ignite. Now, I will have a tree that will have, you know, the initial tree for VD, and it's, you know, pretty standard 4-link, potentially 5-link setup. But as soon as I have my cluster jewels, I make the transition. So we're going to focus and prioritize on talking about Ignite and how it works, how I'm scaling this stuff, and we'll go over the uniques required. Now, I'm going to talk about the stat priorities as well. That way you guys can get a little bit creative in regards to the rares that you use, right? We're not going to have every single itemized piece that you can wear, but I will link my character as well. So there'll be the starter POB, and then there will be my character in there, so you can use it as a baseline to see what I'm doing with my rares, and I will update that link as we go forward. So without further ado, let's jump into it and talk about Ignite and how we're doing damage. The first thing I want to talk about is Ignite itself. And I want to make sure you guys at least loosely understand how this works so you can then begin to understand how we prioritize and look for upgrades and what stats we look for when creating gear for this character. Now, Ignite is an ailment that is associated with fire, and it does burning damage over time. Okay, so the quick and easy, that we're going to do a quick and easy formula so you can understand how this works. Okay, the burning damage over time is 50% of the base duration of the fire hit, or base damage of the fire hit per second. So in our simple example, say we do Detonate Dead and it hits for 10,000 damage. Now, for the next 4 seconds, it's going to tick for half of that damage. So 10,000 hit means we get half of that, 5,000 damage. It's going to hit for 4 seconds, right? So 5, 10, 15, 20,000 damage over the course of 4 seconds. Now, the thing to keep in mind, and one thing I want to talk about and make sure you understand, is every single second we deal additive 50% damage to this monster. Right? So if we can increase the amount of time that the Ignite ticks, which you can get it through various things on your gear, through gems, through, you know, through anointments, through all kinds of different ways to increase the amount of duration of the Ignite, then you're going to be doing more damage overall, right? So say, for instance, for our easy example, we're doing 5,000 damage per second for 4 seconds. If we double that to 8 seconds, we're now doing 5,000 for 8, which equals 40,000 damage, right? Instead of 20 for our initial 4 seconds. Now, here's where it gets a little weird. We also really care about, and the reason we're doing our switch when we get our cluster jewels, is Ignites tick faster, right? There is a cluster jewel that provides that for you, and it's called Blowback, right? This is a node on mediums and large jewels with fire damage, and what that does is it ignites you inflict deal damage 15% faster. So let's explain what that means. So say, for instance, in our example, we've got it up to 8 seconds, which is doing 40,000 damage. Then we, through our gear and cluster jewels and other ways, get that ignite damage duration back down to 4 seconds. We're still going to do the full amount of damage that we would have done for the 8 seconds. So instead of doing 40,000 over 8 seconds, we're doing 40,000 in 4 seconds, which means instead of 5,000 damage per second, we're doing 10, right? So it's really simple once you understand that kind of path, is you want to get as much increased duration as possible right? So initially you want that first fire hit to hit really hard. We're going to talk about how we make Detonate Dead hit very hard for this build. Then you want to get the increased duration as long as possible, meaning that you're accumulating a ton of damage over a long period of time. And then you're going to shrink that down into a window that's really, really short so that your DPS is jacked through the roof, right? I have been able to one-shot conquerors with this build. Serious takes a little time because I don't have Vol right away, and Vol does a huge damage hit, but it's still pretty smooth. It was easy to get Serious down, and understanding how these things interact is really important to knowing how this build works. Now, let's talk about stat prioritization while I still have this screen here. Ignite is an ailment, and ailments don't scale off of your typical things like spell or melee or range damage or any of that stuff. It only scales off of, damage over time, elemental damage, fire damage because it's a fire ailment, burning damage, ignite damage, all of these things listed on this wiki, and I'll put this in the description with the rest of the build information. But when I'm looking for gear and prioritizing gear, I'm looking for fire damage over time multiplier, damage over time multiplier, and the other thing that's super huge for me is ignites tick faster, right? I'm increasing the duration via gems and via a focus mod, and then I want those ticks to go as fast as possible. Now, I do want to quickly touch on that you can stack an ignite if you use gems or a very specific uniques, right? And in our build specifically that we're going over today, Ember Wake is one of the rings we use, which gives you an additional ignite, right? So they can stack in that instance, but they can't stack just from blowing up something again, right? In that instance, the damage is done a little bit differently, and I'm going to link this here so that you can dig in and investigate more. But because of the Ember Wake that we're using, you can stack up to 2 ignites. So you're getting, in that scenario, you've got your 40,000 in 4 seconds. You've got 2 of those going, so it's 80,000 in 4 seconds. As you can see, when we're talking about the realistic numbers in game, you're going to have a ton of damage output going out in a very short amount of time, and you can spend the rest of that time prioritizing dodging, avoiding mechanics, kind of getting ready and prepped for your next Detonate Dead, especially when we're talking about a boss like Cirrus. The second thing I want to touch on before we get to the tree is understanding how Detonate Dead's initial hit works, right? So Detonate Dead itself comes with a ton of flat fire damage, meaning that it's going to hit really hard just inherently from the gem. The really cool thing about this is explosions deal base fire damage equal to 6% of the corpse's maximum life. Now, what we want to understand before we get into the tree and all of our gems and everything is that you can manipulate the corpses you create with Desecrate by utilizing specters, right? So we do have a 4-link specter setup. They're not there for the specters themselves doing damage. They're there for our Detonate Dead doing damage, right? So I'm not going to get all into all the different specters. There's a really good guide out there. I'll link it below that goes into all of the specter life in depth. But what I will tell you is that if we go into game, the 2 specters that I use specifically at the beginning come from Act 3, right? So if we're in the Marketplace or the Solaris Temple, we're going to be looking for the Colossal Gladiator statues, right? You'll see them, like we'll go to the Marketplace real quick so you can see them. And there are 2 of them. There's a female version and a male version. You can take either one, but they have increased % life, right? So we want to make sure, like, there we go, giant gladiator statue. She has one, the one with the spear. There's another female version that has a sword. You can have the sword and the spear one. You can have a combination of the male and the female. You can go any which way you want to, right? But those 2 specters are what we're going to take. And then once we get Delve, there's a sentinel in the Delve that I can show you in my hideout real quickly before we move on to the tree. If we pull this out, we hold Alt and A, you can see that we have to do it far away so Katava doesn't eat it. But let's do another pull here so we can see the names. There's Syndicate Enforcer, right? So if you get yourself a Syndicate Enforcer and one of these giant gladiators, you're going to have an increased life pool, which is then when you detonate those, right? You detonate those specific corpses, it's going to do a big hit so that your ignite scales faster. So I just wanted to quickly touch on Detonate Dead itself and how we're manipulating that life before we get into the tree, because there's a new circle on the tree that also does this for us. So let's jump into that. Now, before we jump into the finalized, starter tree that we're working with, I do want to touch on that if you look on POB that we link in the description below, there is a drop down here at the bottom. You can select leveling with VD, right? The Spellslinger VD before you do the respec, and that tree will be here, right? So it'll have some differences. It doesn't have cluster jewels. It's got everything that you need at this point with a couple nodes that you'll have later, but you can use that to go through the VD Spellslinger portion if you're going to go that route. But we're going to focus on the transition today. And for VD Spellslinger, I'm going to have some gem links so you understand the gem links. It's really straightforward. I will link a leveling guide that Gucci Prada did and Ziz did a VD guide. So if you've been following those things and then you want to switch over to this, that's perfectly fine. But I don't want to focus on that for this build because that's not the final product that we're going to be doing. So when you're ready to go, tree after respec, select that in the dropdown, and we're not going to do a rundown of every aspect of the tree because it'll take an hour long, this video, right? But I'm going to talk about what we're prioritizing. Just like we talked about in the beginning, damage over time, ignite damage, and then that thing that we were talking about in regards to specters, this new little wheel here, Undertaker, the nodes coming up to Undertaker will give you corpses you spawn have 15% increased maximum life. Right? So if you take these two nodes, you're getting another 30%, scaling up the damage of those Spectre corpses, making sure that your Ignite really, really ticks hard because the Detonate Dead hits really hard, right? And then Undertaker gives you increased damage if you consumed a corpse. It's going to get, it's a really, really nice little wheel specifically for our setup. So after the respec, we've switched out of the Heart of Flame and we've gone over to the Breath of Flames, which is multi and ignite. Now, the other thing I'll mention quickly is we also have Spiritual Aid. We are taking all these damage nodes beforehand, and that's percent damage, so it's going to increase our damage, making sure that fire hits hard. This build does use all three life, energy shield, and mana for survivability, so we are taking those nodes all over this tree. Another damage over time is growth and decay, and then we're going to talk about Holy Fire. This Holy Fire wheel, especially from the top side, gives you ignite faster, which we really, really like and is really, really important. The other thing that we want to focus on mostly with the tree is the cluster jewels. Now, as I said previously, I did the transition once I had the cluster jewels. Let's talk about that a little bit. Now, the two notables that you really, really care about with cluster jewels are Burning Bright, which gives you fire damage over time multi, area of effect, which does work for your Detonate Dead, and then increased fire damage. And the super good one is Blowback. Now, Blowback ignites, you inflict, deal 15% faster. So you can stack these. You can get multiple Blowbacks and multiple Burning Brights. My character currently has 2 of each right now. So I'm getting 30% increased ignites speed from just the cluster jewels. And then I'm also getting a ton of multi and area effect and all that stuff. Now, the third thing that is optional at this point is I like to take Kitava's teachings, right? This would probably be best in slot for your small cluster jewel. What this does is every second consumes a corpse and you recover 5% of life and mana, right? Now we are using Mind Over Matter, so getting that mana means more survivability. This is a great jewel, but it can get a little pricey. So if you can afford it, go with a small cluster jewel that's going to give you, endurance charges and max life or something like that, because it's going to help your overall survivability. Before we jump over and take a look at the uniques we're utilizing, let's talk about the Ascendancies. Now, the nice thing about this is before and after respec, you do not have to get rid of Plaguebringer or Corpse Pack. These are the two that I took first. They're really great for VD. They're really great for this build. These are what you want to take first. And then these next three are kind of optional. If you're using Bone Offering, which I totally am, and I totally think you should, then you want to make sure you have Mistress of Sacrifice, meaning that your offering skills also affect you, right? Bone Offering is still super strong and it's still super useful. So I take Mistress of Sacrifice. And then here, you can either take Essence Glutton, which I think is best because you get a ton of regen. It's just helping you heal all the time. But you can also take Commander of Darkness, right? Which gives you increased attack speed and elemental resistances so that you have a little less trouble finding upgrades, especially if you're broke. You can have 30% of your resistances covered right here. And then you can start, getting gear that isn't as expensive, that's got like God tier resists on it or whatever. So keep that in mind when you're talking about these. Now we have talked about our Spectre already, so I'm going to go through that quickly first. As I said, it's not there for damage, right? They don't do damage, so it's a quick 4-link that you can use. Raise Spectre, Meat Shield, Minion Life, Elemental Army. These guys are super duper tanky. They have been able to kill them once or twice, but I ran like a 60% Delirium's T16 main map with 3 scarabs, 4 sextants, like as juiced as I could get it. And I think one of my specters eventually died when it got really, really hairy, but I didn't die. So this character is really, really tanky. Our main 6-link is Vol Detonate Dead, right? Because the Vol is so powerful. It does an initial huge burst of damage. And if we can get our ignites to go off of that, which you try to as much as possible. I think Sirius is the only one that's real difficult because you don't have Vol at the start. I mean, I guess Shaper and Elder would be the same way, but you will get Vol throughout the fight. And then you want to hit him with the Vol and get a really nice tick on there. So Vol Detonate Dead. Combustion, which gives us fire damage and chance to ignite and minus resistance. It's really good. Ignite Prolith. Now, Ignite Proliferation spreads ignites, right? So when you saw in the map that I was running in the beginning of the video, when you hit it once, it kills everything in the area, right? So Ignite Proliferation helps you spread that around. Burning damage gives you a nice chunk of damage. Now, here's where it gets a little interesting. You can do straight Deadly Ailments and Swift Affliction early before you can afford any Awakened gems. These are both really good gems. What I've done is I replaced Deadly Ailments with Awakened Deadly Ailments because it's just more damage, right? And then I replaced Swift Affliction with Awakened Unbound Ailments, right? I guess you could use regular Unbound Ailments too instead of Swift Affliction. Both of these are decent choices, but Unbound Ailments gives you a huge increase to the duration and more damage with ailments. It's a great, great gem. And nicely, it's cheap this league, right? I got mine for 40C a little while ago. So you can grab the Awakened Unbound Ailments and go that route. So that's our primary 6-link. Let's talk about Desecrate, right? So Desecrate is going to have, I only have 2 links on mine right now, right? And I will have my POB in there as well, but you can go with any of these things, right? You can have Arcane Surge, Faster Casting, Spell Cascade. I don't necessarily think the faster casting is needed. I've been doing more than fine with just having Desecrate and Spell Cascade. I would say Spell Cascade is the number 1 here. So Desecrate and Spell Cascade. And Desecrate is just your way to do damage, right? You drop it down, hit Detonate, boom, keep moving. Now, Malevolence is our aura, but we have it in an Essence Worm. So it doesn't cost us any mana. And as we said, we're using Mind Over Matter. So you want Malevolence. It's going to give you damage over time. And Skill Effect Duration. So that's your primary aura. Then we have, if you have room for it, you can throw a Flame Dash in there if it makes you more comfortable. I'm not even using mine at this point. It is in, but I'm going to replace it later with a second curse, and we'll get into that a little bit shortly. But Wave of Conviction, right? So I use Wave of Conviction right before I apply my first Detonate to a boss. It gives them elemental exposure, giving them even more damage and less resistance. So it's just really nice to have, and it's a quick one click, and then boom, you're good to go. Now for Elemental Equilibrium, I want to touch on that real quick because we are using it. You don't have to use it if you don't want to, if you feel like it's too clunky. It doesn't affect mapping at all. You don't even have to pay attention to it. Even though they have less fire damage, you're doing so much, you're just killing things as you go, right? It's no big deal. Now for the boss specifically though, you can use Orb of Storms or Stormbrand, right? And I do have these in the gem links. Before you do any of your DDs, you just drop your Stormbrand, it attaches, hits them with lightning, and then you detonate, right? That gives them even less elemental resistance, and it does boost your damage up for bosses, right? So I do have it in the builds. If it's too clunky or weird for you, you can just take it out. You're going to do less damage to bosses, so it definitely is noticeable, but it's one of those things where it's so easy to use, it doesn't bother me having it there at all. And like I said, it can be Orb of Storms, Stormbrand, whatever you want to do. Now, I want to talk about, our main mobility is Shield Charge, faster attacks, Fortify making us even more tanky, and Shield Charge, you're going super, super fast, right? It's really, really good. And as you saw in the video, I'm just flying around maps, blowing things up. It's really fun to play. So last but not least, I want to talk about survivability. Now, initially when you're doing your build without, say, an auto cast wand, right? So my current wand in game has trigger a socketed spell when you use a skill. Now I use this specifically because for my survivability, I'm using Bone Offering, as we have the Ascendancy that gives us the benefit. So I get all the blocks and all that good stuff. I also have Tempest Shield, which gives me even more blocks and some lightning damage for proccing EE, and I get Arcane Cloak in there as well, which is giving me another boost of survivability from my mana pool, giving me a shield based on my mana pool. So when I have this wand, I've got all 3 of those things in there. Before you have this wand, or if you can't afford a wand like this in the beginning, you can do a cast when damage taken, Bone Offering, Immortal Call setup. right? So you can do those 3 things together, and that's going to give you a decent amount of survivability. And especially at that point, you're probably in lower maps. That's what I did initially. So just, a low casting damage taken, Bone Offering, and Immortal Call, giving me a double layer. I don't have Tempest Shield, and I don't have Arcane Cloak at that point, but I added those in once I got that wand, right? So you can go from moderately tanky to insanely tanky and blocking just about everything. Now I've also on my own character added in a phasing gem, and this thing is going off all the damn time, so I'm even getting more survivability while I'm moving around. So this thing, honestly, I mean, like I said, I did that Delirium map. It was easy, right? It was easy peasy. It's T16, 60% Delirious map. I did some Burial Chambers. I killed both Delirium bosses showed up. So we had Ketosis and the other dude, and I killed them both. They didn't kill me at all. So it's really, really tanky character. Now, last but not least, before we wrap this up, I want to talk about, at least on the initial setup, I didn't put all this other gear in there because the stat prioritization now, and you're going to have my character as an example to kind of see the routes that I'm taking. But I want to talk about the uniques. Now, Ember Wake. We touched on this earlier. Ember Wake gives us a second Ignite. It gives us 50% slower fire damage. It's amazing for Ignite builds. Ember Wake is something that we have to use. The other thing is Essence Worm. So you have to keep in mind when balancing your resistances, you do have 2 unique rings that also give you no life, right? But because we have so many pools, it's not a big deal. So Essence Worm has Malevolence in it, means it costs nothing, making Mind Over Matter way, way better. Roomies for flasks is the first thing that, it's debatable. Witchfire Brew immediately gives you a free curse, right? So we're going to do Witchfire's Brew pretty quick. It's pretty cheap at this point. It gives you a level 21 Despair and damage over time. It's really, really nice. Next flask I got was Roomies, giving me a ton of block and armor. Really nice for survivability. Now, once I could afford it, I did get myself a Cinder Swallow urn. Now, Cinder Swallow is badass. It gives you 10% more damage, increased damage for ignites, right? It turns them all green and stuff, and then you get that ignite damage. But the one I also got has movement speed and chance to avoid being stunned, right? So there's no chain stunning when I have this, plus other stun negation on my character. It's really, really nice. And eventually, when I can do 2 curses, as we talk about min-maxing, and I'll do a follow-up video for my min-maxed character. I'll do my Despair Flask again, and then I'll have Temp Chains and Despair Flask. So that's the easy, cheap route for your curse. I do want to talk about the curse briefly while we're still talking about gems and gear. My first, next tier upgrade was I got myself Solstice Vigil, which gives you no mana reservation for Temp Chains as an aura, and it gives you presence. And Temp Chains is probably best in slot for curses, right? It increases the duration of everything that you do, right? So this makes our ignites go for longer, like we talked about that chain of prioritization. And then I'm running it in Blasphemy, and I have the Shaper's Presence, and it's only costing me this much mana, right? So I lose a little bit of survivability for a better curse. Now, eventually I'll get an additional curse chest, and then I'll put Despair back in, and I'm going to have 2 curses, which is going to jack my damage way up. So that's going to be really, really nice. So keep in mind, early on, use the Despair Flask. It's super cheap and easy to do. And then when you start to get some currency and you want to, you're liking the build and you want to increase it, get yourself Solstice Vigil and Blasphemy Temp Chain setup, and you're good to go, right? And I have Infernal Cry in there as well, right? We didn't touch on Infernal Cry yet, so let's quickly do that. Infernal Cry is going to help. I only really use it on the boss, basically, because it covers them in ash. They take more fire damage. So I do Wave of Conviction, Stormbrand, right when they come alive, boom, Abyssal Cry or Infernal Cry, and then I've already had my corpses laid. I hit Ball Detonate, and they disintegrate. It's amazing. It's a really, really fun build to play. I think that about covers everything that I wanted to touch on. We've already talked about Katava's teachings. You can take that as an optional thing, depending on if you can afford it. And then, obviously for belts, you go Stygian, so you can get yourself phasing, max life, max mana, all that's increasing. You're prioritizing fire damage, as you can see, damage over time multiplier, trigger socketed spell. The Hunter Boots can give you ignites, inflict deal damage faster. You can get that on hunter weapons as well. I'm trying to work on one right now. And the other thing that I'll just note quickly is that dexterity is something that I struggled with. I initially took a point in the tree, but you can get yourself some decent gloves with dex on them and some other things, and that will take care of it. two last little things I want to talk about is the anointment. Now, what I did anoint, and is best in slot as far as I'm concerned, is down here on the bottom, Burning Brutality, which gives you a lot of the things we're already looking for with our cluster jewels. 8% fire damage over time multi, ignites you inflict, deal damage 8% faster. Those two things are exactly what we want, right? So really, really good for this character. As we've talked about Shaper's Presence already, and Temp Chains, upgrades, my little upgrade section, we'll talk about something that I purchased the other day. I got myself a Watcher's Eye. Damaging ailments you inflict deal damage 13% faster. This was 3x or so. You could get, if you wanted to take it all the way to the max, you could get that and more damage over time with Malevolence, but I think those things are like 20x right now. I don't even know how much they are, probably even more than that. Another nice one would be one of those two stats. I think faster is the best, right? So if you can get faster ticks, that's the one to prioritize. But if you can get faster ticks and then pull out something and throw in a level 1 clarity and then get, more energy shield based on, mana from clarity or something like that, that would be really cool too. So you've got some options there in regards to your Watcher's Eye if you want to add it in. And then I'm going to play around and tinker with Timeless Jewels, and we'll do a follow-up video on this build later when I can talk about like my min-maxed variation and all that good stuff. That's it, guys. We're going to wrap this up. Now, I know this is a little different. I didn't go through all the specific rares, but I do want to say that I'm going to do this in the base level tree, and then I'm also going to link my character. So you can look at that, and as I update my character, I will update that link in the document in the description below. I haven't done a build guide in a long time, and I got to do a huge shout out to Nick. This was, Nick's babies at the start of the league, and we've been, going back and forth and talking about it and working on it since we did the conversion. We did that a couple days into the start of the league, and I cannot tell you how much fun I have had playing this build. I love it. It's probably one of my favorite builds ever. This is my very first Ignite character. So now that I've kind of ventured into that area, I could see myself messing around with a ton of other Ignite setups because I just love it so much. And the Necromancer is so strong in regards to survivability. I think you guys will really enjoy this. Guys, if you have any questions on the builds, definitely throw some comments, and also stop by the Twitch stream. It's twitch.tv/Dropadooski. Another huge shout out to everybody. Over this first week, we have gotten so many gifted subs, donations, bits. I cannot begin to thank everybody, and all of you guys that stop by YouTube, even if it's just for a second, stop by from YouTube and say like, hey, I like that video, thanks for whatever, or have questions. It's really cool. I just like having the interaction and people stopping in. So if you've never been to my Twitch stream, it's twitch.tv/Dropadooski. Come on in, hang out. We also have a Discord channel. Everybody's welcome to join. We have a guild and game as well, and as long as we have room, we'll bring people in. Guys, I hope you enjoyed this build. If you have more questions, ask me wherever, and we'll do a follow-up when I finally complete it. Everybody, good luck out there, and we'll see you soon. Peace.